today is literally the day that it's going to be the worst, right? The models will be the dumbest today, and in the future they will continue to improve and become more intelligent. And so what you'll see is expectations will come crashing down, but reality will continue to improve. And then this discrepancy will be dramatic in terms of like transformations in workflows today. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's already real ROI. We're just seeing it on a micro level, kind of to Michael's point as well, is like when it's super constrained, even in our projects that we do, when it's super constrained, when we understand like the inputs in terms of time and money being spent today versus what we could be expecting on the other side, you can really clearly demonstrate ROI.
Sure, I think you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. Also realized we weren't live streaming on YouTube and LinkedIn. So apologies to everyone who is sitting around. This is the challenge of doing two platforms simultaneously. But so if you're just joining us, so we have Jackie here from Omni Business Intelligence Solutions. We got Michael Lin from All In Consulting, and we got Tarun Tamala from Press W. We're going to be talking about AI use cases that actually make money. And so we were just talking about the hype surrounding AI, asking all the panelists, is this all just hype or is there real value here? And we got a lot of different perspectives. Jackie was sharing how if you expect AI to be a cure-all, then you're going to be disappointed. But if you focus on specific use cases, that's where the real value creation comes in. Michael raised a couple points. He said, you know, ROI has two variables. It's your return, but also your investment. So you can try to maximize your return, but if you can minimize your investment, that's also a great opportunity. And then he was also talking about some real world use cases like Klarna's, what was the customer support assistant, and then Bank of America's customer support assistant. And then Tarun was sharing his perspective as well. So let's just dive into the use cases and not talk, you know, kind of move away from the high level stuff. So I want to start with you, Michael, and just ask, like, what are some of the use cases that you've seen that get you excited, or that you've seen have the greatest ROI, whether that's big returns or small initial investment with decent returns?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is just chatbots in general. Like in my opinion on chatbots, I think that it's probably more like medium reward, medium risk in terms of implementation, just because there are actually so many nuances to creating the chatbot that can answer all these different use cases and all these different questions that I think that is probably not the first place I would look to for an ROI, even though it's probably the first question that most people have is on chatbots. So that's just the first comment I wanted to make. The second one is just that also beyond just the LLMs and the chatbots, there's actually like several other areas within AI that I think yield a lot of ROI. Computer vision being one particular one. Some of these tools in computer vision have just advanced so significantly. For example, like before, we always had to use specialized models specific for trained for a particular task, for detecting, for example, a particular type of object. But now even generalized models work actually extremely well. So for example, like in, ChatGPT has the Vision API, and you can ask questions about images. You can have it describe images. You can have it even like pull out text from images. The capabilities are truly extraordinary at this point. So I think that computer vision is definitely a use case that's being slept on and needs a closer look at. The second use case that I think that has high ROI particularly is in localization. So localization is like translations in products. So I remember when I worked at Netflix, I worked on a lot of notifications, and localization was a whole process where we had to build all this tooling for engineers to submit localization requests. It went through localization managers. It went to the vendors who then translated it. Then it went through multiple rounds of QA, and then finally made it back to us, and then we put it into the product. Like it was a multiple day process. It was very involved. Mistakes could happen. Like we've even seen on the Netflix platform, like sometimes some of the subtitles are actually not right. And that's actually one area where I think AI can have a significant ROI, was just that because just the cost per word is like orders of magnitude cheaper than using AI than using a vendor. So that's the ROI right there. It's faster turnaround. It's practically instant versus multiple days of of review. So that's several times faster in terms of speed. And it's also just generally it's very context aware at this point, right? It's very very smart. It's not just like a word for word translation at this point. So it's also very, very accurate. So it's literally better in almost every single way than what we had before. So localization is actually one very high ROI use case. I really recommend people take a closer look at that. Last one is also just summarization as well. I think that AI and chatbots are very, very good at synthesizing information. So anywhere in your products or within your service where people have to do a lot of reading is an area where AI can help out a lot with. We actually already see this type of summarization happening in a lot of different products. For example, like at Google, you search something, you have the AI, summary at the top already saving a lot of people time from having to click through things. I noticed, for example, on Amazon, one of the biggest, I think the main implementation of AI that Amazon has is actually within the reviews, where at the top of reviews, they actually summarize just the key points from all of them. I'm assuming that the hypothesis was that it improves conversion rates, speeds up the time to actually buying. And so the fact that it's still there means that it must be doing well. So I think that those three, computer vision, localization, summarization, I think they're not that hard to implement, but can save your users a lot of time.
Yeah, that's good. And I want to ask a follow-up on localization. So is that when, a product like Netflix, you have users all over the world? Is it just adapting the user experience based on their geography, or is it something different?
Localization, it could be that. I think it's also like a big part of it was actually the translations itself inside the content. So I think it's almost more of a business process improvement because the users don't really they just see the translated text, but it's actually more of a business operational efficiency that users don't see. So
Okay. All right. So we got 3 use cases from Michael. So I'm just going to be taking notes, and then I'll pick 3 of them out, and we can dive deeper into them. Let's go on to Tarun. Any kind of use cases that you've seen that get you excited?
Yeah. I mean, there's the obvious like flashy ones that exist. I think like the Bank of America and Klarna examples are awesome, and there's something like I reference a lot when speaking with customers. But I kind of alluded to this earlier when I was giving my intro. Like I think some of the most interesting problems, like in terms of ROI today, are like really the boring problems, right? So like the whole paradigm shift that's happening is that previously, there's all this data that exists within an organization, and they're stored in like a variety of applications, right? And really what you would have to do as any like knowledge worker, you would have to like go to your sheets, try and find whatever data you need, make it like work with whatever data you have in your HubSpot, and then, et cetera, et cetera. And that's like what your day-to-day was, right? But today, and like Michael kind of highlighted this, like the shift is that the models are able to generalize. Like when I was doing, what we now call like traditional ML or like older styles of AI, it was really like an enterprise only option because it was like so expensive to create any one of these models, and they were just tuned for one specific task. So like an example would be like, look through this like this is a very simple example, but like look through this document and pick out all of the names of people. Right? Like that sounds like, a relatively straightforward task, but you would have to like go get a model, get a bunch of data, train the model, fine tuning, et cetera. Like that whole process would cost a bunch of money. But now, like the geniuses at OpenAI and like all these other companies have figured out that if you train these types of models on enough information from the internet, they get like a general sense understanding of the world. And that unlocks, and then they just expose it to us through an API, right? And that unlocks so many potential applications that were usually cost prohibitive before. So what I like to do is like look at any like document workflows and see like, is there a way that we can introduce AI as the medium between people and the data that exists within a company, right? And so any types of problems where you have people manually reviewing things and every single time like the data is not the same, it's like not structured the same, so it makes it really difficult. We call this unstructured data. It makes it really difficult to like pull the right fields out. Anytime that you have people like reviewing all that information, you can generally apply an AI model right there, and in some cases the ROI on this can be huge. Like localization is actually somewhat of an example of this, like that Michael brought up, but because like you had to send it through a bunch of like manual people to like do these translations, pull out this information and return you new information, that can be simplified using AI. And the same thing applies to documents, forms, receipts, like any of that type of information. You can take these generalized models and with a bit of fine tuning and prompting, you can get them to like operate on your workflow really, really well. So I would say that's definitely one. And yeah, like somewhat anything that has like really strong rule systems right now, when you're like looking at data, I'd say like those applications in our case like seem to work really, really well. Because as I said, like the models are still a little dumb. Like they need a little bit of help. They're not all knowing. Although some people tend to believe that, they are, when you are trying to get reproducible results, which is key for any sort of like production application, you need to have like a very constrained, like almost rule-based system. Otherwise the model can act out, and you can't, in a lot of these use cases, you can't risk that, right? Like let's say you're pulling data from an electronic like health record. There's many, many, many different types of health records out there that exist, and they all contain relatively the same data. You can't afford to mess that up. Like you can't say that somebody has something that they don't, or vice versa, when you're making this data layer. So you have to like break your problems down into small enough chunks. But problems like that, I think, have been performing really well when it comes to like this new AI stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And then Jackie, any use cases that you've seen that you get excited about?
Yeah, so typically when I talk on this topic, I like to break use cases down. I started this framework about a couple of years ago, and it's been helpful for me and my teams to really understand what type of use cases they are. So I have this AAA framework, so automation-based use cases, acceleration-based use cases, and then augmentation. I'm going to give two examples, one that hits on more automation and one that's more on the augmentation side. And I'm going to give an example that's just a typical AI-based product, a non-generative AI example, and then a generative AI example, so that the audience can kind of see AI has always been around, right? So there's different ways to use it in different capacities. So first one is as a business intelligence consulting agency, we tend to use a lot of products in that particular suite. Specifically in Microsoft, we have Microsoft Power BI, which is a leading business intelligence tool. We also use one of the rolling automation tools that typically plugs into that, Power Automate. And so we have a client that spends a lot of time weekly gathering certain data out of a particular system that just costs their team, probably 4 to 6 hours a week. And just gathering that data, transforming it, manually keying it in, it's, got to go into certain sheets, and just, that process alone has the flag of automation capability written all over it. And so we kind of came in and we wrote up a Power Automate solution that enabled us to extract that data directly out of the system, even not using an API, and pull it directly into a database, into a format of which then we could push it into a Power BI. And from there, transforming the data in a sense so that they would be able to have exception-based reporting and ways to actually see anomalies in real time. So instead of spending time, just gathering the data and spending that time just to put it in one place, now we have a solution that cut the time down from 4 to 6 hours to roughly like under 5 minutes, where they're literally getting the same data in, and now it's being pushed into a business intelligence platform, and there's a report being generated as a result of that has key anomaly detection. And so for me, that's just a tangible use case of solid AI usage that we could all be doing in our businesses today, even outside of the generative AI world, for a lot of people to be thinking about. And then on the generative AI side, one of the things that I actually started doing internally within my business is a lot of the end products we have for clients are reports, are dashboards. And that is a delicate balance between the technical expertise and understanding of what's happening from a data model perspective, and making sure that we're capturing all the right data, it's integrated properly, but also that it's being visualized in a meaningful way that people can actually make decisions off of that. And so when I talk about augmentation as a use case, what I started doing is we created some in our work stream of typically, just getting products to a point where we're developing out a requirements sheet and also meeting the clients, obviously, their requirements, and making sure that we're pushing this product out the door in a way that they would expect us to. I started challenging my team to use, like Michael was talking about earlier, computer vision within ChatGPT, and using some of these, just the ability for the machine to partner with us from a creative standpoint and give us iterative feedback in real time. Because I think all of us know speed and execution on new features and meeting requirements is absolutely crucial when you're building something, and getting that real-time feedback from the stakeholders that you're building it for. So we actually created an AI on behalf of our client to kind of take what they would want and make sure that we're iteratively building something that they would want to see, so that by the time we actually show them something, it went through a few rounds of revisions internally that we are comfortable with, and knowing that it's aligned with what they'd be looking for. And from there, like, we could take all of that information and create user guides out of that. We can create SOPs for the products we're building. We can use a speech recognition model to create audio-based SOPs. Like, there's so many outputs. I think people, multimodal outputs that can come as of this. And to me, my thing has always been, if you're creating more value in less time, that's ROI in my mind.
Yeah. So for that second one, is that you guys created like a AI version of like your client's I don't know, of like your client, or like, could you clarify
In a
that
sense,
one?
like, yeah, so like a persona of like who they are and
Oh,
kind of
okay.
what they
Yeah.
expect, and then funneling in their requirements sheet that we have. So that's obviously a conversation that we have with them, so we know that their buy-in's already been reflected in that document, plus just what we know about who they are and their expectations. And that's been something that has been helpful, and we tell them that we do this, and they love that because it's their way of being in the room without actually having to be in the
Yeah.
room all the time.
Oh, that's cool. All right, so we got a bunch of use cases here. So I want to just pick a few of them out. We're doing pretty good on time, and I do want to leave time for a Q&A at the end. So maybe we won't make it to 3 use cases. Maybe we'll go to 2. But I do want to hear everyone's perspective on them. So I want to start with you, Tarun, and I really liked what you were talking about with like the kind of identifying any document workflow and looking at opportunities for like automation or just streamlining that process using some of these new language models or other multimodal models. So what's one of the kind of specific instances where you guys implemented this for a client and it was delivered ROI or resolved a pain, or like what was the impact of that?
Yeah, sure. So let's say when you're like working there's basically like 2 use cases that I think like really jump out to mind that we've been like recently working on. The first of which is pretty similar to what I was talking about before, which is like, I'm using electronic health records or something along those lines. And this customer has like a complete like onboarding sequence where they need to collect a ton of information from their users, whether that's like simple stuff that comes off of like a driver's license all the way to like any sort of like medical records, birth certificate, etc. Right. And typically the way that this would work, and you'd be surprised how often this workflow exists. Like, I mean, it exists in hours, right? Like anytime you're doing onboarding, you're essentially like collecting all of this information, but it becomes a manual process because on occasion, let's say like it doesn't automatically detect in the photo, like we're using the existing tools, you end up in a state where you have some of the data and you need other parts of the data. This is something that AI today is actually really good at doing, is like, one, helpful on the extraction portion of the data, especially if you're not extracting like concrete terms. And let's say, for example, you're just trying to extract details from like a legal contract. There's sometimes like the terms might be expressed as like 1 year, spelled, numbered, there's many different versions of it. And that's like, typically you would need to introduce a human prior to like the modern, like prior to today, you do need to introduce a human in order to like go out and collect that information. And now you're able to do it on through an AI where you can just tell it like, hey, I'm looking for this concept, right? I'm looking for a period of time, and I want you to like scan through this document and go find it. And then like verify that it's correct. That's on the extraction side. But then like once you've done that, right, now you need to actually communicate with the user, hey, you didn't give us XYZ document, and this is necessary for us to like actually fully onboard you. Previously, a human would have to go in, double check it, be like, oh, this like certain record is missing. I have to go and reach back out. But now an AI is able to just look at it like a checklist and say like, great. And this is like something that we've, actually developed. You actually look at it like a checklist and you say like, hey, do you have this information? Here's all the data sources. Go and try and like fill out as much of this as you can. If there's anything missing, go ahead and send a communication out to the user and ask them to supply the additional information, and just do that on a loop until you've collected it, right? So now you've like completely eliminated, somebody from having to deal with that back and forth. And whenever they're getting involved now, they have everything that they already need. And the AI has managed to like handle a lot of that for them, right? So like when it comes to these sort of like document tasks where, again, like you have a bunch of unstructured data, you're trying to pull out certain fields, and then you need some contextual understanding to do so. That's really where this like new gen of AI is like truly shining.
Yeah, I really like that. So you have this onboarding process, and maybe the user has a set of documents that they submit, or you have some other documents for each of the users. With these new technologies, you don't have to have very specific or very precise rule-based extraction techniques. You can just kind of vaguely describe to ChatGPT or the like, hey, I need this information. Can you try to extract it? And then you can just fill in user data that would otherwise require a person, or maybe reaching back out to the customer, which is pretty costly. So curious to get your take, Jackie, just like maybe your thoughts, or if you have experience with something like this, it would be cool to hear about that as well.
Well, I love that thought. And as you were talking, Tarun, I was kind of thinking like about that new Canvas feature that ChatGPT has rolled out. Is like thinking from a development standpoint. I'm not sure 100% how that would look in terms of a code base, but from a feature on a user side of using it, right? You can actually start to see how ring fencing areas and in context is actually still helping support better outputs, right? And I think that is something that they're building those features for a reason, because they recognize, I'm sure, based off of all of the training data / the inputs for all of us, right, using these models, they're probably seeing how awesome we were in the beginning and how lazy we've become over time with certain prompting, but also, being able to just kind of draw a line around certain things. I think that says a lot about how the architecture, how these models work, and what it takes to be successful with them is being able to effectively communicate what it is that you're looking for from a development standpoint, and if you're engaging with it on a front end application. So I think it's very interesting. I'm very fascinated by the context of large language model technologies, the ability for it to have just multi attention heads in certain areas and capacities, and just I think we're all enamored with how it works. But I do agree that that we do need more breakthroughs in terms of what it takes to get to the next level. I think a lot of what people are talking about today, like agentic AI, and right, closing the gaps between where LLMs stop and where humans kind of have to pick up the ball and keep going. We have a lot more work to do on the LLM side in order to get us to that point. Even more so, even though they're rolling out new features and shipping out new stuff to us, it's great. But I do think architecturally speaking that we're still not fully there. And I think that's might be what some enterprises might be experiencing internally. Some of it might be a knowledge gap. Some of it might actually be a technical gap with the actual architecture of the models themselves. But I'm fascinated. I'm kind of standing by, studying it, seeing the latest research, and seeing what's happening, because I see tremendous potential for people that are willing to learn the ins and outs and be willing to adapt with it.
Yeah, it took us, I don't know, about 10 years to go from, AlexNet to GPT-3. Maybe it'll just take us like 5 or 4 years to get to the next breakthrough.
Yeah.
Michael, also curious to hear your take or any experience with doing projects around structuring unstructured data, or, using these data sources that were previously very difficult to get value out of using some of these new technologies.
Yeah. First of all, I totally agree with Tarun's point on just the value of AI, particularly for this type of document processing, especially because I've seen it myself as well. I worked on a project where a client in the logistics had a lot of they just take a lot of orders, and every order is associated with all this different paperwork. processing through that, extracting the data, storing it was like extremely tedious, very error prone, takes forever to do, takes several hours every single day. But at the same point, it was actually very, very critical, because if they didn't do that, then they had no data on what was coming in. And this is particularly a big problem, especially for very paper-based industries where they haven't really fully moved to like digital systems yet, and where paper is just rampant everywhere. And so using AI to extract the data and store that data automatically was a huge game changer for the client. And so it's similar to what Tarun mentioned, but one of the questions I always ask is just like, where in your business do you have a lot of workflows that involve a lot of text, a lot of like reading, a lot of synthesizing? Because those are the areas where AI can really help out a lot. So
yeah, it's really cool. And I feel these industries where they're not necessarily known for being technology savvy or like having the most advanced tooling could be a lot of opportunities to use these new technologies. Let's see. So we're running low on time. I'm kind of contemplating whether we should do more Q&A or do my questions or do audience questions. So let's do a couple audience questions, because I saw a couple come in on YouTube, and then we'll jump back to my questions, which I feel are less important than the audience questions if we have time at the end. So we'll start with you, Jackie, and the question comes from Peter. He says, in terms of automation, what are some ways you can use AI to automate email classifications and to identify key emails that can be summarized and dumped into sheets or Airtables for users to use? So I guess automation and working with, I guess, emails specifically.
I mean, definitely you could utilize a generative route here, but it's something as simple as what I mentioned earlier, like Power Automate. There's just some incredible in low code tools such as that, or even Zapier, right? There's ways to extract information out by having, if it's a repeatable process, right? I think that's kind of what we look for, is certain keywords, whether it's in subject lines, certain type of document patterns that exist today. Those are the conditions that are ripe for automation. We would look for something like that and isolate and identify those opportunities first, and then build some sort of a workflow, right? Something, whether it's a Power Automate or using some portion of ChatGPT to support with the extraction, or maybe more of the summarization component of what you're looking to do. And then it's just integration based. So figuring out how to kind of push that into Sheets and Airtable. There's probably, I don't know if there's one particular product or if it's a slew of different products kind of stitched together off the top of my mind, but I know that it's definitely, it's doable. That type of solutions without a doubt doable today. And I think, I think just kind of research and look out for those different products, the Power Automate, Zapier. Google Sheets even has its own. Google Workspace has a lot of integrations that go directly into it that can extract stuff, especially if you're in the Google space and Google domain. There's a lot of direct Google to Google based products that can support with those types of automations as well. So just research. So there's a lot of great stuff out there.
Yeah, I like that. Just off the shelf, no code tools to handle something like that. Michael, what do you think?
Even GPT has like a plugin too into Google Sheets, so that can help with the summarization as well.
Nice. Michael, what do you think? How would you approach the email automation problem?
Yeah, I think this use case, Peter, is perfect for AI. I feel the system that's built, it will look like this. Create an email inbox where users will send emails to, integrate that with Gmail's API, so you know when a new email comes in. When it comes in, use that API to extract all the subject line, all the data of the body from it, pass that to ChatGPT, have some sort of prompt and be like, all right, this is an email coming to this inbox. Give us some context. These are the potential like categories of this email. Which category do you think this is most likely a part of? And then have it just spit out one answer. And then based on that answer, then you use the API to route it to that right folder. And then you put it in the right tab in, wherever you dump it into, Airtable or wherever else. So I think it should not be too difficult to implement.
All right, so we've heard two very different approaches. One using like off-the-shelf tools, one using ChatGPT and some prompt engineering to do the classification. Tarun, what's your first thought for something like this?
Honestly, I think it's kind of in the middle of what these guys said, and I think that they're also kind of getting at the same thing. But to be honest, I would probably, for something like that, we've used a few like no-code tools like Make or Zapier. Either way, like they each have, basically they have a module where you can pipe data into ChatGPT and you'll get ChatGPT's like response back out. I think exactly like the way that Michael said it is how I would do it. I would just make it in that platform. We've used it for a few of our automations. So like what's a good example? Yeah, we like send links all the time in our Slack. So we like created, we did a little bit more custom coding for this one because we wanted to control the output a little bit more. But you know, we basically set up a bot that just grabbed the links in Slack, feeds it all into like GPT. It summarizes each link, adds like highlights and keynotes, and then every like Monday we get an email with like, here are the things that the team was like talking about and discussing like over the last week, right? And that was something like you can 100% build. Honestly, that use case is something I would call like a low-hanging fruit. Like I don't think it'd be difficult to build at all. And if it was able to be like piped, if you have like a good use case for it and it's like piping into Sheets or doing something that you can like leverage later down the line, I would say do it. Like it shouldn't take, you know, more than a day to get something up and running.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'll throw in a fourth approach to this problem. You know, if you're talking about classifying key emails, the first question you can ask is like, what defines a key email? And if it's something you could pull off with just like some regular expressions, like if a keyword is in the subject line, it's like, okay, we'll just, you know, identify those emails and put them somewhere, or put them in Airtable or Google Sheet or something. If you can get away with just using regular expressions like, oh, if this word appears in the subject line or something like that, then that's a great way to solve that problem. Or you could use some traditional machine learning or old machine learning, as Tarun put it earlier. You could just, if you have some examples of key emails, you could train just like a binary classification model to solve that problem. Okay, so we got another question from Deja Vu, and we'll start with Michael for this one. He asked, are there AI use cases that help with knowledge graphs? My company is trying to see ways to educate users how data is connected with different entities.
So just candidly, I haven't worked personally with knowledge graphs, but I do know that for knowledge graphs, I think the question really is whether or not it's all about whether or not the data has relationships, and then the knowledge graph will help try to capture that. So if you're trying to work with the knowledge graph, I know you mentioned companies trying to see ways to educate users how data is connected with different entities. I guess my question to that is just like, is there a relationship between all of the data? And if so, then knowledge graphs could be could be used in that use case. So yeah, it's all about all it does is really just map the relationship between data. So if there is a relationship, then knowledge graphs is something to consider.
Yeah, I guess more context might be needed to give a full answer to this question. But maybe more at a high level, Tarun, any thoughts on like knowledge graphs and integrating it with maybe like ChatGPT type things?
Yeah. So I mean, like graph style like databases and like relationships between data have existed for quite some time. I think the interesting thing that you could do now is create associations in the data. So like those connections between two data sources. You could create those using some type of like large language model that are unique to only being able to be created by those large language models. So an example would be like, let's say you're looking through a bunch of documents, and some of the documents relate to each other, which seems like the foundation behind what you're asking. And so you want to know like, okay, given one document, like what are all the other like sort of dependencies or other documents that this one is related to, right? So there's a few different ways you could create those, what we call like the graph edges, right? So like the connections between the documents in the graph. You could use more traditional techniques. You could be like, if they have the same keywords, put a connection. You could use a little bit more advanced techniques, which is, there's something called like cosine similarity, for example, which basically makes a bunch of text into a bunch of a vector of numbers, and you compare the vectors together. So like, without getting too lost in the weeds on that, you could also be like, hey, large language model, GPT, like here's document 1, here's document 2. Can you extract from document 1, or can you extract from both of them all of the similar concepts that exist between the two documents, right? And now you can store those similar concepts in its own layer in your database, so that anytime you get a document in, you can say like, what are the concepts of this document? Great. Now, like, let's go and like look in our database for like relationships between that and like the similar, similar concepts that we pulled out earlier. Right. And that's a use case that like, is only possible using something like a large language model. Like previously, you would need to like use a human to do that, right? And so that might be a great way of like assembling a knowledge graph. Essentially, you can think about it as using large language models to like augment the amount of data that is stored in the knowledge graph itself.
Yeah, I really like that. So you're not even using, so this is more so like you use GPT or some large language models to help you construct the knowledge graph, not necessarily operating on top of the knowledge graph with one of these models. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the unlocks that people may not fully appreciate these days. And then Jackie, what do you think? Any ideas, suggestions on knowledge
Yeah, I
graphs?
mean, I think naturally there's all knowledge graphs being built around us on the internet. That's why so many things are personalized and marketed to us. But I think for use cases, what we're saying is there's internal, right, helping you construct these models in a way that it stitches these identities and these relationships between certain bodies of text. I think just the fascinating concept of natural language processing, LLM technology by itself, being able to really look at a vast amount of information and create contextual relationships between it is fascinating enough. And so I really do think it's a great way to utilize it to construct the graphs themselves. But I'm always thinking from the user side too, is I would love to see like an actual chatbot built within the knowledge graph interface where you could utilize it for more search and recommendations. So if you're a user looking to kind of query and understand more insights related to two entities that might be stitched together, you might want a more intuitive way to learn about those connections. And that AI can help you explain it right in simple terms on why it connected these two things. I've been studying a lot about what is ontologies and stuff, just kind of different connections, and very being able to understand a little bit more about that, I think can help you get to that next level. But I would imagine like an AI powered chatbot within the knowledge graph interface, somewhere where someone could actually directly engage with it and start to experience some sort of information that they're getting out of it. And that just helps with their education and awareness, because that also, they might look at a connection that the AI makes and disagree with that connection and might want to go back to, the actual constructing of that knowledge graph and make an adjustment to what connection, right, it built. I think that would be I'm thinking of like an interactive way. And I think from a construction standpoint, and also from just usability, it could be really interesting to use AI.
Yeah, I love it. So we talked a lot about use cases and different things that you guys have built and worked on, and then we fielded some questions from the audience. So we got a few minutes here. I just want to look ahead and kind of get you guys' take on what you guys see as like the future of AI and how businesses are going to be utilizing it in the coming, maybe even the next year, but also next 5 years and so on. So why don't we start with you, Tarun? What do you see as the future of AI use cases in business?
Yeah, so first and foremost, like everything that we've already talked about, I think needs to be done on like 100x scale, like, and that probably will happen first, right? Like, so all these like constrained problems, like these use cases where we know the models can do it, they just like nobody's put in the resources to go and solve it just yet. Like I'm sure those will get uncovered and solved like in the next 5 years, right? Those are, looking at a decade-long time span, those are the low-hanging fruit. Now, what gets like really more interesting as the models continue to improve, and like we kind of see this, like if you're looking at like tailwinds in AI, like where is it going, right? Like you start to see models like GPT's most recent one, O1, right? The key difference between O1 and the other ones is that it's like able to, it's using like chain of thought underneath the hood. Doesn't really matter. Like it's getting a lot better at like strategy, planning, and understanding like more dense concepts, right? Or like high level concepts, and using all of the data to supply its answers, right? So like as we start to move forward, those types of models will unlock use cases that look much more like co-pilots, like, right? So like Jarvis from Iron Man and stuff like that. Something that is able to reason about a tremendous amount of data and like think through its actions. And I noticed this like in my own workflows too, to be honest. Like when I have a very specific workflow that I'm doing right now that I was using O1 to help me like reason through it, right? And it was like really from like a strategy and like planning perspective. It involved some code files. It involved like a business direction and component, like a marketing strategy. It involved like a sales strategy. It involved a few different like elements, but O1 was able to like combine all three of those, which seem kind of like disjointed when you think about it from a data perspective, and use them to inform whatever task I was giving it, right? And then I eventually ran out of tokens on O1, and so I needed to like it swapped me down to 4.0, and I immediately noticed a significant difference like in the capabilities, right? It's not able to like strategically plan on that level. And so when you start to move away from like very constrained problems, which I think you're going to get a lot of ROI from because you can productionalize those, you start the next 5 years after that, right, are probably going to look more of like co-pilot for like knowledge workers, right? And I think that term is a little bit overloaded. Like, to be clear, I think Microsoft Copilot is actually pretty horrible. I don't think it does a very good job, but like, I think that concept still applies. Of like taking a person like me, knowing all of the files and data that I'm looking at on a day-to-day basis, keeping that in memory, in context, and then helping me answer like strategic questions and like iterating with me. I think you'll start to see more of that be emergent as the models continue to get smarter. Like right now, they're too constrained in terms of what data they know, or even if they could take in all the data, they just can't answer strategically enough. But I think we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, so giving models more context and these models having a deeper ability to reason, so they don't need such specific instructions to do things. It's just like, here, solve this vague abstract problem for me, and then it can kind of go off and do it. And then having these specialized co-pilots that can really, everyone in the organization or all the knowledge workers have this co-pilot that has all their context and can help them be more efficient.
Yep.
Jackie, what do you see? Where do you see this all going?
So similar thoughts on large language models. As I was talking earlier, like just agentic AI, I think is a big world that we're seeing a lot of investment. Salesforce, ServiceNow, a lot of companies going all out on building products that are like that. So I think companies are going to want to understand where there's opportunities for agents in their own world, right, in their own operating system, and how things how it could actually benefit them. I think that's something that people are going to want to be thinking about. I know robotics is on the horizon. I think we're seeing a lot of crazy cool stuff being developed, and unsure how that will happen for small businesses, but I do think that will change how we potentially interact and experience the world around us. Like if iPhones and Apple iOS starts to integrate generative technologies, and people are really going to be comfortable with speech as an actual reliable input for what it is that they want. And I think that is also going to impact how they work. I don't think people are going to want to type as much anymore. I think people are just going to want to speak into systems left and right and just expect that those systems are commanding to whatever it is that they're looking for. I know NVIDIA CEO was talking about coding going away. I'm not sure how much of that will happen, but I do think that there's a lot of barriers that are being broken in that sense. And so I just think that there's a lot on the horizon for companies to consider now, especially if they are using large language model tech. Hallucinations has been a huge topic for many of us, and just figuring out how to reduce them in a meaningful way that doesn't involve 100 different techniques. I think that just creating simple solutions, and everyone knows where there's gaps still, and just finding ways to close those gaps. And then I'm sure when we have more advanced technology, there'll be new gaps.
I love it. And then we got 2 minutes left, but Michael, would love to hear your take as well.
Yes. So I think it's just going to be more accessible, and the time to development is going to just be further reduced over time. And in fact, we already see that right now, like with chatbots, for example, like some of these RAG applications can be quite complex. And then now Google actually came out recently with Notebook LLM. You just upload a few things, and then it works pretty decently well. We already see that also, like OpenAI, they have custom GPTs, similar concept. Pinecone has Pinecone Assistant as well. You just upload a few, and it's actually quite accurate. So I think it's just time to development. It's just going to shorten, and it's just going to be more accessible.
I love it. More accessible AI, and people can move faster. I get excited about that notion, specifically for entrepreneurship and startups and one-person businesses. but we'll see how that goes. It's an exciting time for sure. All right, so I just want to thank our panelists once again for taking the time to share their insights and talk to me for an hour. I also want to thank everyone that joined us live. This is the Data Entrepreneurs Podcast. We have our next session coming up next month, where I'll be sitting down with Louis Serrano, who is a YouTuber and AI educator. So if you're interested in learning more about AI, that's going to be a great session to tune into. All right. And with that, thank you again, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.